Welcome to this question and answer session with Bruce Thornton, independent consultant and trainer. Bruce developed the risk model several years ago with David Paul of Gwynedd Council. Bruce has introduced the risk model to authorities across Wales and England over the last 10 years. In this conversation, we focus on discussing the home conditions tool and the graded care profile for the assessment of neglect. Bruce, can you explain how other specialist assessment tools can be used as part of risk assessment and other assessments?
There are several specialist assessment tools that can be used for practitioners, but there are so many it can be a little overwhelming at times. Unless you get it into perspective, you'll find yourself buried in forms and paper. So, let's start by getting this into perspective. The tools are a way of focusing on a specific part of a family's circumstances. Imagine that we're in the countryside and you have a view of the whole sky and scenery in front of you. Then you pick up a pair of binoculars and look through these. So now you have a narrower view of things. You won't see everything, but if you turn that focusing wheel, you'll be able to really see in detail a particular part of the scenery. In assessment, we assess the family's situation in general, but sometimes we have a particular question to resolve. For example, do these parents have the capacity to change? That's a very different question to a general assessment. So there are tools to help you with that, to draw your attention to certain things that may be relevant. But it's important not to think that a tool is scientific or provides you with the answer. And if we need to find something out, in the old days, we'd go to a library or pick certain books out. You'd look at them and think, that may help. No one expects you to take all the books home or read it all. So a list of tools is like a library for you to search to see if there is anything that may help you focus. In the risk model, there are over 20 specialist assessment tools. They range through themes including substance misuse, neglect, capacity change and mental health. Some authorities have structured these on intranet sites to help staff find them. Of course, there are others that practitioners may already be familiar with.
Did you find that there were some assessment tools that practitioners found more useful than others?
And that's true. I have a view about which ones should be useful for staff, but I find in practice they tend to use quite a narrow selection. For example, the change tools are important as they assess parental capacity to change. There's a separate presentation about using the change tools. The other popular tools are two tools used to assess neglect. These are the home conditions tool and the graded care profile. If you imagine you're undertaking a care and support assessment, you'd agree that this was a general assessment and would probably cover the three domains of the assessment framework: child development needs, parental capacity and family environmental factors. Let's imagine when you're doing this, there is a specific area of focus that you need to address. So, I want you to think of undertaking an assessment and then focusing in by using a specialist tool, and then to bring the findings from the specialist tool back to the main assessment so it feeds into your overall analysis. The same would be true about undertaking a risk assessment. Use a specialist tool by all means, but always bring it back to your overall analysis, and in the case of risk 2, its relevance to the likelihood of significant harm.
You mentioned two tools used in assessing neglect. What are these?
There's a lot of talk these days about neglect. Neglect is actually quite a wide set of considerations. However, we tend to think of neglect visually, a dirty house or children who are poorly cared for. There are two neglect tools which were modified and included in the risk model. These were the home conditions tool and the graded care profile. Both of these have been in use for many years. They focus on very different things. One is short and covers a very limited area. The other is broader and takes longer to complete. The home conditions tool looks at the physical aspects of the home and the impact of this on the child. The graded care profile, in contrast, is a more comprehensive tool that takes a wider perspective on neglect. It includes 4 domains of assessment: physical care, safety, responsiveness and esteem. I think it would be interesting for me to take you through the home conditions tool quickly. This is the shorter of the two tools. Before we look at the details of the home conditions, all tools follow a familiar structure. They have headers with the child's details and would finish with conclusions or analysis, and sometimes the actions indicated. Each tool has a specific function, and these general sections will be self-explanatory for practitioners. The Home Conditions tool was originally included in the Department of Health's family pack of questionnaires and scales, issued with the Children Act guidance to the assessment framework. This goes back to the early 1990s. It focused on the physical aspects of the home conditions. It was developed to make practitioner observations more objective. The tool originally included 11 items and was used as a checklist to confirm if a particular item was present or not. Modified as part of the risk model to include 20 items, and the scoring was modified. The factors included areas such as the cleanliness of various parts of the home, adequacy of furnishing and toys, presence of hazards such as drug paraphernalia or pets. Originally, the tools were used to indicate the presence of one of the 11 items by ticking yes or no. The modified tool considers not only is one of the 20 items present or not, but also its impact on a child. It ranges through the item not being present, being present to some extent, to be noticeable and have some impact on the child, to be very apparent and have a serious impact on the child. The purpose of the Home Conditions tool is to draw the worker's attention to factors that have been objectively observed as being present in the child's environment. It also draws attention to the impact on the child. Of course, the impact will vary depending on the age of a child. A baby will be less impacted by soil floors or drug paraphernalia compared to a mobile toddler. So, adding the total score and notice how many items were causing a serious impact to the child helps the worker to analyse the effect of the home conditions on the child. Against each item there is a tick box named Flagged for Attention. This reminds the practitioner there is some action they need to take in respect of that element. The tool concludes with a decision about the level of concern the worker has based on the findings. This ranges to very concerned to no concerns. The Home Conditions tool has been well received by practitioners, and we also have stories of the response of some families to its use. Some have kept copies of the assessment in their home. Some have even kept the form, continuously self-assessing. In some cases, this proved very positive, with the checklist becoming a self-prompt and check for parents. Some versions of the tool have been made to look a little friendlier than the forms that practitioners usually see. As with all tools, they promote collaborative conversations with families. So, having the tool as a focus for these conversations can be useful in practice. Some authorities have developed a version of the home conditions as a scoring sheet where progress is tracked over time. It provides a record of the score against each item over a series of dates. It is a visual representation of progress. The Graded Care Profile was originally developed by Dr. Srivastava and Dr. Polnay of the Luton Teaching Primary Care Trust. It was originally developed in 1999 and used in assessment of child neglect. It is more extensive than the Home Conditions tool. The Graded Care Profile covers 4 areas or domains of neglect, taking a wider assessment of neglect. The 4 domains include physical, safety, responsiveness and esteem. Within each area or domain there are sub-areas. For example, the area of physical care is divided into sub-areas. These are nutrition, housing, clothing and health. If we look at the Graded Care Profile form, we'll see that within areas and sub-areas there will be various questions asked. For example, in the area of physical care and the sub-area of nutrition, there is an item about the quality of food. Here you will see the way the grades are associated with statements reflecting how well a child's needs are met. Across all the areas and sub-areas of the Graded Care Profile, you will always have 5 grades ranging from all needs met, essential needs met, some essential needs unmet, many essential needs unmet, most or all essential needs unmet. In the example of the quality of nutrition, the grade of all needs met would be indicated if the parent provides excellent quality and healthy food and drink. In contrast, most or all essential needs unmet would be indicated if the parent does not consider the health or quality of diet, and when prompted there is very little improvement. The form repeats this pattern and is very self-explanatory. The grades are scored 1 to 5. At the end of each area there is a record of the scores for that section. Please note that scores of 4 or 5 indicate that a child's needs are unmet and may indicate evidence of neglect. So, when we look at the scoring sheet, you'll see that each item is scored. You take from the score from the section of that form and copy it here. Each sub-area is given an overall score. This is an average score. So, if the example of nutrition has scores of 1, 1, 2 and 3, the average score would be 2. However, if a single score is either 4 or 5, the average score becomes a 4 or 5. Remember that the purpose of the assessment is to identify and record evidence of possible neglect. On the form, you may also flag items for attention. Because the form is quite long, this serves as a reminder that there is something in this area which you would want to respond to. There is a section at the end of each area to record comments or additional evidence of your findings. Each of the 4 areas follow this similar pattern. At the end of the form, there is a record for your overall findings. As mentioned, any sub-area scored as a 4 or 5 would be indicative of neglect and prompt further actions. The decisions range between neglect not being substantiated to a judgment that significant harm is indicated. There is a record of the further actions indicated. We have discussed 2 tools to assess neglect. Home conditions is only focused on the physical conditions of the home and its effect on the child. Grady Care Profile takes a much wider perspective beyond physical to also look at safety, responsiveness and esteem. In the areas of responsiveness and esteem, we'll find the links between neglect and emotional harm. Having 4 areas of assessment provides a wide base assessment of neglect. We have explained that the items graded as 4 or 5 are indicative of neglect. Whilst an assessment of neglect is inevitably searching for deficits and concerns, the Grady Care Profile provides evidence in relation to other needs that are being met. Scores 1 and 2 will be considered strengths and positive achievements for families and can be used as a basis to talk about change in other areas of the care for their children.
Thank you for explaining these in detail. Do you have any tips on how they can be used in practice?
Both of these tools have been used successfully by practitioners. The home conditions is shorter and is more popular. What we've done with a larger Grady Care also is to create 4 mini assessments for each of the areas. For example, if you're assessing and only want to look at a concern you have about responsiveness, the form can be used to only look at that element. So you can either do all of the areas or just one of them. Some authorities have procedures that indicate that one of these 2 tools is always used to assess cases of neglect in child protection. It enhances the evidence basis for decision. If we think back to why we should use these forms, remember we're trying to avoid subjective judgments on other people's lives and home situations. The tools provide evidence of what is observed and aim for greater objectivity. I think one of the tricks for practitioners is how to use a strengths-based approach with evidence from the Grady Care Profile on what the families do well. The forms do this in a very visual way that families can respond well to. The form can be used to encourage talk about strengths as a basic for change in other areas. I remind practitioners that forms provide focus and evidence, but above all, they stimulate conversation with families and develop better understanding about a family's circumstances. A form should never become more important than good collaborative conversations with families.
Thanks, Bruce.